Some students just seem to have a great memory. Have you noticed that? Some students, they spend very little time, very little effort on studying, and they can just remember information. And some students, they spend all of this time and all of this effort on studying, and they remember nothing. What is the difference here? And can you train that? Is it possible to train your students to have a better memory? A lot of the time, I hear the sentiment that young people these days, just their memory is not as good because they don't need to have that memory. You don't have to remember a phone number anymore because it's just saved on your phone. You don't have to remember, the answers to a certain type of question because you can just look it up. Everything is so available. You can document and record everything. So therefore, memory is starting to get worse and worse. Now, I would argue that that's not necessarily the case. Memory and the ability to remember certain types of information is a symptom, is an outcome of a process. Memory is not something that you just directly in itself control. Otherwise, learning would be very simple. You'd just say, remember this, and then you would just remember it. Instead, we can't do that. We have to say, okay, in order to try to get my brain to remember this, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, we can remember it. Memory is an outcome. It's a symptom. When the process we're using is not very good, the outcome is not very good. So if I had a book, and then to remember this, my strategy is to smash my face into this book repeatedly, again and again, until hopefully one day I have retained that information. I'm more likely to knock myself out before I remember anything on this page. So intuitively, obviously, we know that different types of processes lead to different types of outcomes for our memory. And so it's not necessarily that young people these days have a poorer memory because they don't need it. It's that young people need to use memory differently. And so the skills and the processes that they develop for using their memory are very different. And we can see that when we think about any new type of technology. For example, some people that are very elderly, they struggle with using the internet so much that they don't even know how to check an email. Do you think that those people simply just have such a bad memory and are so stupid that they can't remember how to open a computer or a laptop and log in to check an email? No. When they were going through life, they used their memory and they used their thinking processes for completely different types of processes and different types of outcomes. And so therefore, they got better at using their brain for those types of things, and they don't know how to think about the digital world. Whereas young people in this modern generation, the digital world is native to them. In fact, we call them digital native. And so for young people of this generation, they are good at using their brain and having a memory of certain things. It's just different to how we might see it in a conservative, traditional education setting. The question is actually, is our education system accurately reflecting the needs of the real world, or is it reflecting the world of 5 to 10 years ago, which is actually very different to the world now? If you think about 10 to 15 years ago, what phone were people using back then? Did the idea of a smartphone even really exist? The world is changing so aggressively, so rapidly. The education system never really is able to keep up. It's almost impossible for the education system to develop as quickly as the society is developing. And the reason is because there's a high standard of safety for the education system. We don't want to do something and then that just completely sabotages an entire generation's chances of success. And so we're very conservative about new changes. And as a result, it falls behind society because society as a whole is not as conservative. Society wants to push ahead at full speed. Education system wants to come and chase after that as safely as possible. And that gap is widening and widening. I think it's not very productive to think about whether students now have good or bad memory or what the technology is doing for them or not doing for them. Yes, we can have all of these discussions, but at the end of the day, what does it really change? Are you able to change the world that your students will grow up living in? Are you able to change the environment that they are surrounded in when they go home, when they're out in the workforce, when they're not in your classroom? All of these things are out of your control. The only thing that we can do is help prepare our students to face this world and succeed more effectively. And so when we look at it from that perspective, we're not asking, do students and young people have a good or a bad memory, or can we not train it? But the questions that we're asking are, how can we equip people to utilize their memory most efficiently for whatever purpose, whatever goal, whatever context they need to use that memory in? And that is completely transferable. And that supersedes and bypasses all of this discussion. Let's explore what makes a good memory. There's this train station in London. It's called Waterloo Station. Waterloo Station is enormous. It is a sprawling station. It's like a small airport. There are so many people coming in and out of it every single day. It's impossible to walk into a place like Waterloo Station and not see at least 100 other people around you at any given moment. Waterloo Station has 24 platforms, and there are almost 100 million entries and exits from that station every single year. There are dozens of trains either entering into or departing from that station every single day. Waterloo Station is huge. In fact, it even has its own retail space. In fact, it even has its own champagne bar in the train station. Now let's compare that to another station in England as well. And this one is called Shippier Hill. Shippier Hill Station is very small. In fact, it's not really even a building. It's more of a bus stop than anything else. A few benches, there's one platform, one train goes in and out, and it gets around about a dozen entries and exits from that station. About 12 per year, about once a month. That's probably the same person. There's probably one person that takes that train once a month. They arrive on one month, they leave on the other. They arrive the next month, they leave on the other. 12 per year. Do you think Shippier Hill would have a champagne bar or a row of retail shops? Probably not. And so this is very much like how memory works. If we want to have a good memory, we want to hold on to information for a long period of time. And we want to be able to use that information, manipulate it, connect it to all these other pieces of information for whatever purpose and application we want to use it for. It's not about just taking one specific piece of information and making it as high quality and as deep as we possibly can. If we take Shippier Hill Station and we made it huge, we added retail shops and a champagne bar, we added an entire mall complex into it, how many people do you think would go to that station? I'm sure they would have more. It would be in the news, this huge renovation of a small station, and people would come to have a look, and maybe for a short period of time there would be lots of entries and exits. But a year later, maybe that 12 visits per year is now 100. Maybe it's 200, but it's not 100 million. And Waterloo Station doesn't have to constantly renovate and be in the news to drive people to it. No, Waterloo Station can be on an off day. It can be dirty that day. Maybe it wasn't cleaned properly. Maybe some of the trains aren't even working, and it's still going to have millions of people coming in and out of it. Why? Because it is connected. Waterloo Station is heavily and densely connected to multiple parts of not only London, but in the entirety of England. Shippier Hill is not. It's connected to a single train on a single platform. Memory is about the connections and relationships between pieces of information. Information in isolation is death when it comes to memory. If information you learn is thought of as just singular information, and we spend a lot of time thinking about, what is this piece of information? How can I make it more memorable? What are all the different dimensions of this? And we understand it very, very deeply. Conventionally, some of us may think, well, when we understand it that deeply, we're going to hold on to it for longer. Yes, for a short term, we've renovated that piece of information and it looks a lot more impressive, but over time, it will fade. It will degrade. And this is something that's called knowledge decay. Knowledge decay happens for all types of information. What prevents knowledge decay, or what slows it down, is how connected it is. If the information feels relevant, our brain is more likely to hold on to it. Imagine back when we were living in caves, hunter-gatherer, we're grinding herbs in the evening and making a fire, grilling our meat over it, learned how to use basic tools, carving out some cowhide so that we can make a coat out of it or something. And imagine in that situation, just randomly forgetting, do I need to cook food to eat it? Or can I just eat this meat raw? Imagine just forgetting, where did I find that water to drink yesterday? You're not going to pull out your set of stone cards that you've scribed and chiseled your flashcards onto. You're not going to be sitting there at night eating your meat over your campfire thinking, where was the water hole from yesterday? Was it behind the mountain? It was in the forest. And then you do the flashcard again. That's not how the human brain adapted to learn. The human brain is very good at keeping information that is relevant to us. And it's very good at getting rid of information that is not relevant. Because just like the UK English government doesn't just have unlimited resources to renovate every single train station in the entire country, your brain uses a lot of energy. It doesn't have enough energy to remember every single piece of information that is thrown at it. Our brain would explode. So it's very, very efficient at removing information that it sees as not relevant. And the trick is to understand that just by saying something is relevant doesn't make it relevant. We can't tell our brain, remember this, it is relevant because I'm getting tested on it. The fact that you're getting tested on it might add 1 or 2 more connections, but from your brain's perspective, it doesn't matter. So when we're learning, in order to have a better memory, we need to encode that information when we first learn it by creating lots of very meaningful and relevant connections. And how do we do that? It means that every time we take information in, we have to examine it. How is it similar? How is it different to what we already know or the other new pieces of information that we're learning? How can we compare and contrast? Can we group some of these ideas together? This all creates relationships and connections. And that process requires cognitive effort and cognitive load, and that is desirable difficulty. And that process of thinking that I've just described, hopefully you recognize that is higher order thinking and higher order learning. And you can see now why it has such a beneficial effect on memory. But most techniques that our students are using, sometimes that teachers are encouraging students to use, are not about doing that evaluative thinking process. It's just about repeating it, doing it again. Review your notes later. Make sure to check them every single day. Make sure to practice it at the end of the week, every week. It's about repeating it again and again. It's saying, yes, you're going to forget this very quickly, so make sure that you review it all the time. It's like having a bucket that's full of holes. And instead of saying, let's plug the holes, we're saying, fill it with water more and more and more and more. It's always leaking, so make sure to fill it more and more. So we can see from that perspective, it doesn't make sense. But why can't we just hold on to information and collect all this first? And then maybe later that day, later that week, maybe we can come back to it and then we can build those relationships. We can't do that because by then your brain has already forgotten. If information is irrelevant, your brain is able to forget it in seconds. In seconds, not even minutes, not even hours. In seconds, within seconds of learning a new piece of information, if it is not relevant, your brain is so efficient that it may forget it. So if we leave it until later, if we leave processing the information and thinking about it deeply for more than even a few minutes, already we are working uphill. It's making it unnecessarily harder for ourselves. It is better to spend more time and effort and focus at the point of receiving that information than to look at it again later. And we intuitively already know this. Imagine you have the opportunity to have a one-on-one session with a master of a craft, something that you're very passionate about, some role model that you already know about. Let's say that you're very good at sewing. And so sewing is a passion of yours, and you could have a one-on-one session with a master sewer. And in this session, they're teaching you a few things. You're going to ask questions. You're going to say, okay, in my experience, I've tried this, and what are your thoughts? They'll tell you a story, and you'll ask more on top of it because you recognize that in that moment, your ability to make sense of that information and bring it together and consolidate with your own experiences is so important. You don't want to just say, okay, here's a session. I'm just going to record it. You speak. Okay, that's good. I didn't really connect all of it in my mind. And then later on, you'd go home and listen to the recording. And then now what? Maybe you've got questions. You can't ask those questions. Maybe there's something that they said and you think, that doesn't make sense anymore. It made sense at the time, but it doesn't make sense anymore. Now that's more time you have to spend. It's time that's wasted. And we may never reach the same level because we don't have time. We've got other things that we need to do. There's other subjects that our students need to learn. There's other topics they need to study for. There's other exams that are coming up. It's not possible to constantly be filling the bucket with water when it's full of holes. So how do we train students to have a better memory? We teach them how to do higher order learning. The memory is the outcome of better higher order learning. But what do we need to help the students do higher order learning? They need to be able to self-regulate. They need the metacognition to learn that skill so that they're able to know what works and what doesn't, to push and to pull, and to personalize and individualize their learning exactly how is optimum for them. And what do we need? For them to be trained in that skill, they need to be enabled. They need the time management, the task management, the self-awareness, the ability to reflect, experiment, and then reflect again on those experiments in order for them to grow. And this is why this mini course has been structured in the way that it has. And hopefully this all makes sense for you now. You see the big picture, why it's so critically important that instead of just teaching you a few tips and tricks that you could just give to your students to fix some solutions on the surface level, why I am so passionate about solving the real problem here. The real problem that makes their learning performance and learning outcomes better, that makes them less stressed, makes them less anxious, less dependent on you, and therefore makes it so that your life is simply just about doing more and more and more and seeming to get less and less returns for the effort that you're putting in. So that you're not just feeling more overwhelmed and that your students are not just feeling more overwhelmed. In my experience, working with tens of thousands of students over the years, this approach has been highly successful. Some of the students working through our program that we're coaching directly, they're getting the top 0.1% results in the entire country. They're coming first, second, third in examinations being sat by tens of thousands of different people. And they're studying less. They're doing voluntary work. They're helping their parents at their shop. They've got part-time jobs. They're hanging out with friends, socializing, sleeping properly. All the things that really a student should be able to experience in their life. And they're setting themselves up for success. So I hope this series of videos has been helpful for you. I know that there are lots of things that I wasn't able to touch on. There's so many other factors, as I mentioned before, that I can't talk about just because there isn't enough time. As we know, education and learning is incredibly complicated. There are some points that I wish I could go into more. There are some situations that I haven't been able to talk about. And you might be thinking about some of those. Please feel free to have this discussion together where we can explore some more angles that we haven't seen before. If you haven't already, go through, check the links to the resources that we're providing for more specific guidance. If there are questions about any of the topics that we've talked about, feel free to leave them. We can have that discussion. If you have other colleagues that you think should hear this message and that you think that they would benefit from, please do share this with them as well. Thank you for your participation, your discussion, if you've been leaving some comments. Thanks for your attention, and I hope to see you in some of my other videos.